I welcome here to everyone on behalf of Institute of Regional Studies. President IRS, Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, will be giving the welcoming remarks. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Umaira. Good morning and Assalamu alaikum to everyone. It's really a pleasure that all of you could find time from your multifarious activities to be with us today. It is the first of Ramadan in Pakistan, and everybody is fasting. Thank you very much for joining us online. It's a topic which is of great significance and of interest to all of us. South Asia is a region which is of immense importance globally because of its strategic location, and we have two countries, Pakistan and India, the largest countries in South Asia, which have a relationship which can best be described as acrimonious. It's a relationship which, if to say it in very straight words, that if it's a relationship between the two countries, if it improves, it will have great benefits for the region, for SAARC, but at the same time, uh, the situation on ground is that the relations between the two countries are not good. Things are not moving in the right direction. And SAARC as an organization is not working at all due to the strong animosity between the two countries. There are various aspects of the relationship. Obviously, there are reasons why the relationship is not good, and in addition to that, you also have global interests uh, in the area. We have Afghanistan. We have the rivalry between the U.S. And China. We have Russia, which is resurgent Russia, not the old Soviet Union. So I think all these factors, they play a key role as far as regional dynamics and politics is concerned. So I am sure all the speakers who are extremely learned and know the region and the area very well will able to enlighten us with their views. So over to you, Humera, and once again, welcome and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much. Let's start with the first speaker, that is Dr. Salma Malik. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, Kazim University, Islamabad. Dr. Malik's area of expertise are in the South Asian affairs, conflict studies, arms control and disarmament. Her research areas include conflict management and transformation, human security, CBMs, and micro disarmament. Dr. Malik has rendered lectures as a guest speaker at the PAF Air War College in Karachi as well as Command and Staff College in Quetta. Dr. Salma Malik has many publications to her credit and has co authored various books, including Small Arms and the Security Debate in South Asia, published in New Delhi in 2005. Dr. Saiba, I start with you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Omera. It is so great to see. I know it is the first of Ramzan, and because of you and the Sehri, one could hardly sleep. But the very fact is that it's wonderful to start this particular month on a good note, and good to see great friends um, all over. And welcome, Suba. It's so great to see you here. Um, And I'm extremely grateful to the IRS, Humaira Saiba, you yourself, Ambassador Sam, for this honor. Because we have limited time at hand, I would try to be as quick as possible. One can talk endlessly when it comes to India and Pakistan. And because I'm the first one who's going to set the tone here, so I'll try and be as polite as I can so that India Pakistan don't end up fighting, because the mood in Pakistan is to make good relations rather than fight as such. But there are certain things that need to be highlighted. And when we look at this particular question about the prospects of India-Pakistan relations, the betterment of relations between the two countries, I would like to flag a couple of questions here. And to start with, is there a chance for or potential for peace between the two countries? Leading to that, I would like to ask the question, what exactly is peace? How do we translate peace? Moving further, In the South Asian context, is peace the absence of an all out declared war, or is it something which can continue at a low grid, low scale, below the radar conflict? Should we call that should we call that peace? Because the big forces are not out, we are not stopping each other's ambassadors or the diplomatic authorities from moving across the border, and so many other things, the way we had in 2001, 2002, where there was this military impasse. So everyone thought that there's going to be a war. But in current circumstances, if that such things are not happening, is that peace? Seeking further, um, that if we want to maintain peace between each other, shall the conflict continue in a proxy form on a third country, a country's turf, say Afghanistan, or a disputed region, say occupied Jammu and Kashmir? And now that we have, in the contemporary sense, gone purely hybrid, um, so and in which provides the state actors ample maneuvering space to do whatever they have and whatever they can. And unfortunately, the case in point here is the Indian chronicles that were unearthed and so many things. And one takes it in a very realistic stride that these things can happen, would happen, and we must keep into mind that there can be several such possibilities. So is that peace? Because again, we are not fighting with we are not daggers drawn. We are not fighting with each other. And lastly, the question is this time right and ripe enough for peace? And I do remember one of the earlier works that Dr. Chandran had carried out, a collaborative study, was on the herding stalemate and ripe time. Uh, what Williams Artman had proposed about that, is this right time for India and Pakistan to engage? One must also keep in point here that even if India and Pakistan deny this prospect that we are not at conflict with each other, several authorities internationally since 2003 have declared India and Pakistan as an international armed conflict. And whatever we do or whatever we don't do does not change that reality. Yes, we can have our own parameters. We can negate it. We can have an alternate reality. But the fact is that something or the other is restricting these two countries from maintaining healthy, positive relationship. So that needs to be thought it out. When we look at India and Pakistan's relations, there have been several highs and lows, the peaks. I would call the highs and the peaks as the positive virtues, starting with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and Swaran Singh talk, in which Kashmir had factored in as the big actor. And since then, it has been a moot point between the two countries. And between 62 to 63, despite all the discussions and the deliberations both these countries had, and that time it was it was even the luxury that you didn't have the media hounding you the way the media hounds state actors now. So even then we see that despite good intentions, the high politics between India and Pakistan do not allow or would not allow for an amicable solution or a settlement between the two countries. And then after that, there have been several windows of opportunities between the two countries, along with what I could call the crises or the firewalls that prevent these two neighbors and somewhat leads them into a very uneasy tango of a sort. So one step forward and two steps backward. That doesn't really speak volumes for the progress. Again, I would use a very cliched statement that South Asia is one region of the world which is highly populated, and it not only bears one fourth of world's population, it also has massive negative indicators to share: poverty, ill health, poor education, so many other things. But it also has two countries, India and Pakistan, coming to a point where, through their technological prowess, they were able to manage a nuclear status for themselves, however um, unofficial that status may be. But the very fact is that there is a lot of potential between these two countries. The South Asian diaspora, the youth, when they move abroad, or even if they don't and they're working, there is ample opportunity for them abroad, and they make their countries extremely proud, or they make the region extremely proud. That also depends as to how much ownership we are willing to take of the region and look at the region as our common space rather than box ourselves in nationalistic identities. Having said that, the state nations and their politics are not going anywhere. So that has a very, very strong bearing on whatever is happening between the two countries. Moving further, I mean, we have after Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and Swaran Singh, we had Benazir Bhutto, Rajiv Gandhi talks, we had the composite dialogue process, the Agra process, which many in Pakistan later criticized that the military high command had been a bit too generous in offering that thing, and the out of box solution has derailed the Kashmir process. But the very fact is that Pakistan did offer, despite coming from a position of weakness or coming from a position where people considered Pakistan to be compromised, at least a solution or at least a roadmap to resolve Kashmir. And much later, the late Professor P.R. Chari, when I was having a discussion with him, he did say, and he did write about it as well, that this was a good time or this was a good offer and we should have taken it up and or at least worked more on that front. But unfortunately, things passed are things passed, so you can't really do much about it. Then the composite dialogue process and the comprehensive bilateral dialogue. When we look at the composite dialogue process or the Lahore process, the one thing that stood out between the two countries was a level of maturity when it came to strategic issues. Agreed that Kashmir is a moot point, that none of the two actors are really going to talk about much. But at the same time, there has been something which I'll discuss slightly in detail later, but the fact that Siachen and Sir Creek, being termed as the low hanging fruits, were also talked about and negotiated. Unfortunately, it didn't come to any big point. But the fact was that both these countries, after 1998, had gone nuclear, and India and Pakistan had very cautiously and very, very maturely, to the surprise of most of the countries, worked on having a strategic stability regime with each other, which worked for uh, as long as the process was working, and it is still working because both the countries realize that this is something which carries a huge stake. But the fact is that it also ends up providing the countries with uh, two alternatives. One alternative is exploring limited war under a nuclear overhang, unfortunately. And the second is where you have these limited surgical strikes that can be carried out, preventive strikes, preemptive strikes, whatever you may call it. And of course, there is always the alternative reality where you say that, oh, this thing happened, and that is the reaction to this. So all of these things will keep on happening. These spoilers will keep on coming up, but can we actually give peace a time? Can we actually give peace some space? So, if for us peace is less fire across the LOC, in ideal terms, I don't think that is peace because few less bullets doesn't really matter. There has to be a complete silence across the LOC and no civilian casualties take place. Placing a barbed wire, doing several things. We are doing that with Pakistan border as well. Does that resolve the problem? To an extent, yes. To a greater extent, no. Because the dynamics of the conflict are of such a nature that these measures do not control much. But if we have placed a barbed wire or fence, would that mean that there is no penetration as said by India? So that is a question India needs to address. But what is South Asia facing? South Asia is facing a lot of poor indicators collectively. And to work together, I think number one, the point that Ambassador Nadeem Riaz also pointed out about SARC, that is one forum that despite the fact that it is on a ventilator, it's in an ICU, and even worse than a COVID ICU, but it needs to be somewhat revived. Why it does need to be revived? Because SARC does carry a lot of positive potential in it. SARC was a forum which provided the Indian Pakistani leadership to uh, start talking to each other. IK Gujral and Nawaz Sharif, General Pervez Musharraf, and Atal Bahari Vajpayee Saab. So one cannot dismiss the good sense to SARC. There is a lot of potential to SARC. That's an unfortunate reality that SARC is not really being revived, and that too has become a hostage to what it was not supposed to be, the bilateral whims and fancies. So anyone who wants to hijack SARC has hijacked SARC, and that's where it is on a ventilator. Now, if you have a SARC minus one, as Prime Minister Modi has said, or the greater sentiment that comes out of from the extremist leadership, will that work? It's kind of surprising because if you want to have Afghanistan, you can't really take Pakistan out of this cartography and place it elsewhere, despite all the efforts towards having yet another cartography. You can't have a small connection to the Wakhan border through the Shakskan Valley and say, even on a map, that okay, this is Afghanistan and India are neighbors, so we can work that way, and we can easily take out this huge chunk called Pakistan because we don't like it. You can't select, delete, push back your unfavored um, actors. You have to work with all. The second thing that comes with that is the prospect of having the BRI. The BRI has become a moot point, or at least the CPEC has become a moot point between India and Pakistan. CPEC can be a point of contention as it has become, or it can very well be a moment of opportunity. As part of the BRI, India, Bangladesh, many other countries are collaborating with China. Even at the worst of India China relations, the trade volume between the two countries did not suffer beyond a certain point. So, technically, if we really need to progress, if we really need to have good finances and trade volumes, which leads to a better human security and better relations between the people of this area, we need to look at all of these points of contention through a different prism, and that is not very difficult. It is just where we can exercise maturity when it came to the strategic matters. We can exercise an equal amount of maturity when it comes to trade, people to people contact, and I must say that I've been to India many times, and it is a wonderful opportunity to be there. And this particular moot point that we have between the two countries at the moment, where the Pakistanis and the Indians cannot meet with each other, it's an extremely difficult situation because we both at our end are creating uh, unintentionally enemy images. As a average Pakistani student whom I teach, what he or she sees on the TV is Muslims getting killed in the Delhi riots, people being lynched, talking about love jihad, talking about the national registration, talking about Kashmir. So what do they see? That's the entire image of India. Do they see? They don't know the secular India. They don't know if secularism in India was a facade, or is secularism in India a reality, or is secularism in India dead? Because as much as we try to convince them that no, this is not the India we knew, um, they don't see India from that perspective. And I'm pretty sure there must be a mirror imaging on the other side as well, right? So, unless and until you have a peoples to people contact, unless you have an increased interaction, things are not going to work. And the rhetorical, emotional statements that the leaderships make, especially Prime Minister Modi, I would say here, and many of his extremist minions, uh, is extremely damaging to a lasting relationship that can win them uh, a re-election, that can play very well in electioneering. Yet the fact is that it is going to have a deep-seated structural damage done to these bilateral infrastructure and relationship, which is going to reflect from immediate to short term to medium term to the long term. And we may have two countries which are totally um, unconcerned with each other. And to add to this thing, the proxy grounds, Afghanistan would follow suit. So it's going to be a very uncomfortable neighborhood for everyone. And I think to talk about peace, to wish for peace, is not a position of weakness. The current Islamabad dialogue that Pakistan had, in which the Prime Minister, the SAPM for national security, as well as the army chief, all of them hinted towards peace with India, and all of them were open and enthusiastic with peace with India. And the DGMO meeting, which talked about a ceasefire, we, as such, we don't have an agreement with India on ceasefire. But even after 2003, when we did not have an agreement, written agreement with India, India and Pakistan did not have that agreement on the LOC. For the next 10 years, both the countries, despite not having an agreement, honored their word with each other. And then, of course, LOC is also part of how the politics reflect. So this is a very, very unfortunate reality. Um, few more points that I will say, and then I will rest my case, and then we can have the question and answers there. And that is that is this time right enough for peace between the two countries? I think there is never a time which is not right enough or perfect time. But at this moment, despite the Pakistani leadership being on the same page, the civil military leadership both being on the same page, there are certain indicators which are going to hurt these peace overtures. And one of the biggest indicators here is Kashmir. And Kashmir is not like any other Indian territory which is facing insurgency. It is a UN recognized, placed by India, contentious issue. You cannot change the political demographic reality of the occupied area. So please, one has to see to it that do not do things which have a lasting damage. But of course, there's a lot of wisdom to what India is doing when it comes to Kashmir. And the changes are going to become so severe at the end that it is going to create a de facto balance or a de facto uh, positioning on Kashmir. But the very fact is that is going to give rise to a lot of negative sentiment. It has already given rise to a lot of negative sentiment, and it is going to go bad in a very, very long sense. For Pakistanis, as I said, this is a very, very emotional point, as well as a political and a lawfaring point. So, if we take emotions out of this story, there are many things that Kashmir means for the Pakistanis as well as for the Indians. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that we only have the sole ownership to Kashmir. But I think the only amicable solution to Kashmir is where the Kashmiris are given an equal voice, despite the fact that this was a bilateral contentious issue as written in the spirit of Shimla. But when we look at the Shimla agreement and we only look at Shimla and say that it is a bilateral agreement, um, if I may be allowed to quote the Shimla agreement, it did say that it is bilateral. However, this is one of the several options that may be exercised to reach an amicable solution on issues such as Kashmir and any other contentious issues. However, you cannot deny the UN's superiority um, over this decision making body. So one has to look at things in their entirety. India's arms buildup is entirely India's own story. However, the fact is that, and India has a very valid response to the arms buildup, that it has other security priorities, as well as the fact that many times in arrogance, many Indian BJP or RSS leaders, they say Pakistan doesn't matter to us. But Pakistan does matter to you because many of these armaments that are being made are very Pakistan specific. A surgical strike did not take place in China. It did not take place in the Indian Ocean on a Chinese ship. It happened in Pakistan. Agreed that there would be reasons for doing that, but the very fact is that if you say and you deny that Pakistan does not exist in India's strategic calculus, then this is an anomaly. And no one is believing that. And that is also adding to the conflict environment and widening the conflict spectrum. The China factor, as I also said, is something very alive for India. But the very fact is that both Pakistan and India have interacted with several partners in the past, and the world has continued. It hasn't come to an end. And as I just said, that India and China are one of the strongest trade partners with each other, despite the small border skirmishes that have taken place. So that means that there is some logic to having better trade with each other. China does not want to indulge into an all out battle and war. So, can we show the maturity and discuss these things amicably? We have that maturity, we have that prudence. It's just that we are not applying it to this particular case study. And as I just said, that BRI or the CPEC, which is linked primarily with trade and commerce, can provide that golden bridge between several countries of the region, the vertical as well as the horizontal bridge, bridging between India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and furthermore, which can be mutually beneficial to all actors concerned. Um, the Pakistani leadership
Ma'am,
in this
if
particular
I
field.
may
I'm just
interrupt.
finishing. Thank you. I'm just finishing. Thank you, Humera. The last point that I'm going to say here is the low-hanging fruits that I alluded to earlier, and they have been mentioned again by the Pakistani leadership in this current Islamabad dialogue, which does not mean that we are shunning away Kashmir. Kashmir remains as pertinent as anything, but if there is a window, even the tiniest bit of window of opportunity where we can come together, for example, on the ceasefire, despite not having an agreement, we have this formality of informal structures. If Siachen and Sir Creek, which have several times come to a point which was just a dot away from the signature, if we do that, nothing is going to hurt us. And it is going to work a long way in building confidence. I would stop here. Thank you very much, Humera, and thank you
Thank you
for the
so
extra
much.
time.
Thank
God
you so
bless.
much, ma'am. Just as a conclusion, what you said is like both India and Pakistan has massive opportunities to grow together by cooperating in many humanitarian development sectors. However, looking at the contemporary circumstances, moving towards peace is still dim, and both the countries are not fighting with each other, but one still wonder that is there a right time to engage between both of them, and the reality is not changed, and somehow the significant issues are restricting both the countries to go ahead and towards the peace path, and these can be further discussed in the question and answer session. Now I welcome Mr. Subhachandran for the second speaker. Let me introduce you, sir. Dr. Subhachandran is a professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Indian Institute of Science Campus, Bangalore. Subhachandran holds a PhD in International Relations from the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Mr. Subhachandran's edited work includes Armed Conflicts, Peace Audit, and Early Warning in South Asia. Until recently, Subhachandran has been the director at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies in New Delhi. Primary areas of research include Pakistan, Afghanistan, Jammu and Kashmir. Dr. Chandran has also been an associate at the Pakistan Study Research Unit, University of Bradford, has been a visiting professor at the Pakistan Studies Program, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, and a visiting fellow at the Department of Peace Studies in the University of Bradford, UK, University of Urbana-Champaign, and the University of Jammu in Jammu and Kashmir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Quimera, Ambassador Riaz, Quimera, Salma, and fellow scholars. Thank you for inviting me. Let me start with a happy Ramadan note to you, and also share uh, the pain in losing Mr. Rahman. He's a regional asset to all of us, like Mabulak. Uh, Sorry to care about it. Many of us have grown up reading him. Uh, Let me share my condolences on that. Let me thank the IRS. IRS has always been close to many of the researchers in India, especially the publications, the regional studies. I used to read it quite regularly when I was in Delhi. Unfortunately, in Bangalore, I don't have access to regional studies. Hoping to see it somewhere in the online format. And also, I used to have access to Spotlight. So we know about IRS and IRS work, and we have been following the events that you have been holding. I have also worked with some of the IRS scholars. Shagin is a close friend of mine. So IRS is quite known. Thank you. So I'm glad to be here with you in this panel. Yeah. Now on the subject, the prospects of India-Pakistan relations. I'm planning to do my intervention in, let me set my time, in 15 minutes. When I was planning to work on this, the prospects of India-Pakistan relations, where should I position my presentation, what should be the pivot. I made that myself, that I'll make my pivot is on 3 points. One, it's an academic pivot, then a political one. I'm not going to bash one country or the other. Let me look it as an academic one, between one academic to another, and between one think tanker to another. Second, I'm also planning to look at India-Pakistan relation, the question where we are going, that the prospects of India-Pakistan relations in terms of what it is from a realistic prism, than what India-Pakistan relation ought to be from an idealistic prism. So I'm not looking at the second part, what India-Pakistan relation ought to be. I'm only looking at what it is. The third one, I'm kind of doing I know it's not the right word to say, a postmortem of where we are going, than a policy roadmap of where we should go. So in the process, if I come across cynical, please forgive me on that. I'm just looking at where we are heading towards. So in the first section, let me start with 4 basic assumptions of India-Pakistan relations. One, since 1971, I'm just taking up 1971 because of it kind of gives me a window, 50 years, 5 decades. It also gave me another window. We reached one of the worst in between India-Pakistan relations in 1971. We reached the down. So 1971 gives me a yardstick. Yeah. If you ask me, how the bilateral relations have been, one thing we can say is it has not been following a unilinear trajectory. To put it through, and to use what Professor Steve Cohen said in a different context, I'll use it in India-Pakistan context. We have been muddling through. So that's my first assumption. For the last 5 years, the relations have been muddling through. My second assumption is, since 1971, despite our nuclear weapons programs, the nuclear test in 1998, a war and a near war, multiple militancies, international environment changing or not changing, significant peace processes, the bus, truck, and the train services, cricket matches. So we have a bundle of things, on both sides. So my second assumption, based on what we have been through in the last 5 decades, is that we have neither been totally destructive nor we have been totally constructive. Again, we have been muddling through. The third point, third assumption I would like to make is, we have been walking in circles. We are not, as the first point that I made, we are not going in a unilinear trajectory. We have been walking in circles. I would rather say not circle. We have been walking in elliptics, meaning that we move, what Salma was telling, that 2 steps forward, and then when we go back, we don't go back in a circle. We go back 2 steps backward. So we are walking in a kind of a elliptic, taking 2 steps forward. For example, after the nuclear test, the bus service, yeah, or after 2001 to whatever happened between the 2 countries, the Musharraf, Manmohan Singh, Vajpayee, and then leading to the ceasefire, the bus service and the truck service between 2 parts of Kashmir. So you see that the forward movement of the elliptic, and then backward movement in what happened in 2008, 2014, 2016, 2018. Yeah. So that's my third assumption, that we have been walking in elliptic, 2 steps forward and 2 steps backward. The fourth, despite all this, my fourth assumption is, all through the 5 decades, one symbolic gesture, one watching a cricket match, one bus service, or one person coming to in a bus, landing in one place, have dramatically changed the bilateral relationship. So I think we are on this sense, despite the second point, what I was telling you about the worst thing, the worst in us. I think the best in us is also true. All we need is one symbolic gesture, and then we transform totally. So that's my 4 assumptions, that there is we have neither been destructive nor been constructive. To sum up, we have been muddling through. And if you ask me, we will muddle through. Unfortunately, that's what we are going to do. Now, let me move to the second section. Just take a look at the time. In the second section, I want to present you three hypotheses, kind of using the ripeness theory. I didn't expect Salma Malik would refer to our work. That's one of other scholar, Rizwan. I worked with him. I'm sure he also has IRS connection on Zachman's ripeness theory. We looked at whether India-Pakistan was the relationship was ripe enough. This, by the way, we worked in 2001, 2, 3. I think that was the phase, and we are still talking about ripeness. As I agree with what Salma was telling, there is never a ripe time or a right time. We have been like this, muddling through thesis. Yeah. So using that asking the question whether it is ripe, my tentative conclusion is they are not, and I'll make three hypotheses on why I'm saying it's not. But having said that, it's not that we should not take initiative. One, at the global level, both India and Pakistan are pursuing two different paths. Either we are pushing ourselves into a different geostrategic orbit, or we are getting pulled into a different geostrategic orbit. I'll come back and explain it to you. That's my first hypothesis, at the global level, that both countries are either getting pulled or getting themselves pushed into a different geostrategic orbit. The second one, the first one I talk in global level. The second one at the regional level, for India and Pakistan, the immediate priorities are different. There are, of course, few common economic and energy opportunities, but the political decisions overshadow them. That's my second hypothesis at the regional level. The third hypothesis, this is at the national level. I think both countries, India and Pakistan, are building a new narrative for the 2020s. I'm sure there are many who are listening in this forum or following India closely, and we have been following Pakistan closely. So the narrative that we are building, is kind of a narrative. Obviously, Pakistan has a right and to build a narrative that it wants. India has a right to build a narrative it wants. But unfortunately, in this narrative, bilateral relationship is not a part of it. I am yet to see that. So these are the three hypotheses: one at the global level, one at the regional level, and one at the national level. Let me explain this. First hypothesis, that what I mean by at the global level, that India and Pakistan are either getting pulled by different orbits or getting themselves pushed. Let me start with India. India is looking east and looking south. What do I mean by that? India is, for the last 20, 30 years, we have been talking about a look east approach. This started sometime in the mid 90s with Narasimha Rao as an economic strategy to look at Southeast Asia. Later, when Manmohan Singh, during the next decade, it envisaged East Asia also. And during this regime, the current government is looking at transforming the look east into an act east one. So you don't keep looking at, you be there. So try to be in Japan, try to be in Australia, try to be in South Korea, and use Southeast Asia as a springboard. So India is looking east, yeah. And the other thing is India is also looking south, the Indian Ocean. There is a greater maritime awareness in India in the last few years, or maybe the last 2 decades, the importance of Indian Ocean, the importance of Indian Ocean as a stepping stone for a larger objective, larger goal for India. So India is looking not only east through the land, but India is also looking south through the oceans. And I was telling it's so that we are pushing ourselves into this. Similarly, Pakistan is looking west and looking north. The relationship between Pakistan and the West, the Middle East, the relationship with China and Russia in the recent years. It's a strategy that Pakistan is looking at in terms of in what it could get from West Asia or the Middle East, and what it could get from China and Russia. So this I don't have to explain it to you. You would know better. Now, the second part of my hypothesis on this is it's not only we are pushing ourselves, we are also getting pulled into this. It's not only we are looking at them, they are also looking at us. There was a time in the 1990s and the early decade, India was only looking at Southeast Asia and East Asia. Now, Southeast and East Asia is also looking back. The idea of a quad where Japan, Australia, and later South Korea, trying to have a larger relationship with India. So they are also looking back, and then this great idea of this Indo-Pacific by the US, pushed by the US, supported by Japan, whatever may be the larger objective behind it, we are getting pulled into it. So that's what the push and the pull part there. Similarly, I'm sure, in Pakistan, you would agree. Even if you don't agree, that's okay with me. That's how I look at it. How Russia and China are pulling Pakistan into their frame of things. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, or what is happening during the last week was an expression of what Russia and Pakistan are trying to build. So, that's my first hypothesis, that we are looking into two different worlds. Now, we also have to keep in mind, when we talk about India-Pakistan relations, whether these two different orbits, Russia and China on the one side, US on the other side, and India and Pakistan getting pulled into these two different orbits will help us come closer, or it would spread us apart. This is the first question, that the first hypothesis that I would make. The second hypothesis, at the regional level, the immediate priorities are different. I have two parts to it, that not only the immediate priorities are different, there are some common priorities on economy and energy fields, but the political decisions kind of overshadow them. What do I mean by it? I think India is looking at, for India in the immediate neighborhood, India is looking at China. China looms large in India's regional strategy, and also neighborhood first approach. And in neither of India's China approach or in neighborhood first approach, Pakistan does not figure in that. India is looking at in a different framework. I'm sure Pakistan is also looking at Afghanistan and China in a different framework. I'm not sure how much India figures in the immediate priority for Pakistan. So that's my first part of the hypothesis. The second part is there are economic and energy opportunities. For example, the energy pipelines, we have been talking about multiple pipelines from Iran and Turkmenistan. Thankfully, I didn't do my PhD on that. It would have gone for a waste. There are also opportunities on electricity grids. We have been talking about CASA for a long time again. Central Asia, South Asia, South Asia electricity grids, and then the economic corridors. And I'm sure you would know, what happened recently when we talked about economy and how political decisions scuttle the larger economic and energy opportunities. The third hypothesis, it has two parts again. The first one is at the national level, India and Pakistan are building a new narrative for the 2020s. Better bilateral relationship is not a part of it. I think Pakistan is building a narrative. I'm sure the Islamabad security dialogue, the one that you Salma also referred to, how India and bilateral relationship figure in this, or the narrative that India is building on, India wanting to have a space in the global trade, global table, a new neighborhood, the Arctic push, the Solar Alliance, the vaccines, BIMSTEC, BBIN. There are multiple things that you see in how South Bloc is looking at rest of the world, and then the bilateral relationship is certainly not a priority in that. The second part of it, this is the important one. The second part of this hypothesis, the narrative talks about building peace and better relationship, but I see more as a rhetoric than a reality. We talk about building relationship, but we pursue something on the opposite direction. Yeah. Now, let me kind of come to the last section after looking at the three hypotheses. Now, a question that we may want to ask, since this is not an objective of this discussion, what India-Pakistan relation ought to be, or what India-Pakistan relations need. Instead of we looking at where it is or what India-Pakistan relations want, the question of need and want, or what it is and what ought to be. Perhaps it's at an academic level, at a bilateral level. Maybe let us look at a cost-benefit debate. We work together, what happens? We don't work together, so what happens? Let us not start with that assumption that just because we are neighbors, we also always have to work together. This is an emotional argument that we are making. Let's make an economic argument, how it would help us. If it is true that we are neighbors, then we have to work together, then Sindh and Punjab should be best of the friends in working on Indus. And Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, where I'm working and where I come from, should be best of the friends in terms of sharing the Kaveri water. Just because we are neighbors doesn't mean that we work together. Let us not look into the emotional argument. Let's look into the economic argument and then see what we lose. I think that's a strong argument that we may want to make it in terms of what do we lose if we don't work together, and put it in the larger security debate. Unfortunately, the state looks and listens to the security one. Maybe we may want to, if you are thinking in terms of a larger bilateral relationship, positive one, I think we may have to speak to them in that language, not in the candle language in Wada. But having said all those things, let me go back to the last point that I made in the first section. All it takes is one gesture. And tomorrow, I'm sure you will invite me for another discussion, what all we can do. Something has happened, we are going in the right direction, or we are picking up a new narrative, what all we should do, right? We have been like that. Let me end with that expectation that there will be a positive gesture and we'll be talking something better than what we are talking today, that where we are is not a comfortable thought. Thank you. I rest my case here.
Thank you so much. Perhaps these smallest gestures does open opportunities to connect with each other. And to sum up your presentation, you rightly pointed out that both the countries are missing the common direction towards peace, and they've been meddling around all these decades, and significant peace steps had been taken in the past decades, but not a constructive path has been uh, framed out. And three important hypotheses that you outlined in your presentation, that where India and Pakistan are positioned, that they both have distinct geostrategic orbit at the global level. At the regional level, both countries have different interests to achieve, and at the national level, since 2020, both countries are building a new narrative again, contrasting to each other's interest, where bilateral relations are still missing. Thank you so much. I now welcome our third speaker, Mr. Kamar Shima. Let me introduce you, sir, first. Mr. Kamashima is a strategic and political analyst. Mr. Kamashima is a lecturer at the Department of International Relations at the National University of Modern Languages, Namal, Islamabad. His area of expertise is international politics. The primary focus has been on the South Asian politics, civil-military relations, human rights, and religious Islamic parties. He regularly appears at the national and international media. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Humaira. I'm really thankful to Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, and I'm really thankful to IRS for giving me this opportunity. And it's great to share this platform along with Dr. Chandran and Dr. Salma. I think today's discussion is very beautiful discussion, and we have to understand, although there are not much bright prospects, but as former Prime Minister of India, Mr. Vajpayee said that you cannot change friends, but you can change friends, but you cannot change neighbors. So I think this is where we have to start. What is important to understand that the geostrategic position, how this to be used for a geostrategic dividend. This is what we need to realize now. And I think there is a massive realization in both the countries. And but we need to work. We have iconic and towering personalities on both sides, in India and Pakistan, and they need to play a very strong role, and they need to be very active. And we must understand, and the leadership on both the countries must understand that hope is not a policy. We have to act. And if we won't act, we are already too much late. We need a lot of integration. We need a lot of connectivity. So if prospects are not brightened, it could be brightened. We can work on that. And how can we brighten the prospect? That is important. And that is today's talk. I think the bottom line, both the countries understand that there is no alternative to peace between India and Pakistan. That is the bottom line. So we need to work on these lines, that how to get closer. So what is alternate to peace in India and Pakistan? That is underdevelopment. It is continued hostility. It is propaganda war. It is media war. This is what we have been doing over the period of time. So Prime Minister Modi was of the view that let's fight underdevelopment. Let's fight poverty. And this is the same kind of gestures have come from the leadership of Pakistan, but there are no actions. And this is what we have to, that how we have to move forward from this. The cost of these kinds of alternatives is very high. And sometimes it's not a war, not a bloody war, but that creates, or the environment generates warlike environment. And this kind of an environment, if it generates warlike environment, then we have to understand that 70 years warlike environment is more dangerous than 7 days war. So we are living in an era or in times where we have seen 70 years of warlike environment. And this is much more dangerous, as I said, than 7 days war. So the leadership of both the countries, they have to bridge the perceptual divide. It is more consequential than real divide. So the real divide exists in land, but this perceptual divide resides in hearts and minds. And what we have seen that how divided our both societies are. We are so much close and connected with the cultures, our shared past, the way we have lived in the past, but the divide we have seen, this is more dangerous. This has created more hostility. This has created more animosity. So, for example, that if we can reach a ceasefire agreement, that is a big development. And we can do much more than this. We have the capability. We have the potential. We have yielded so many bilateral agreements in the past. That didn't mean that we didn't do something good. We did that. And although there is a mindset of hostility on both the sides, there is an issue of Kashmir. Pakistan has always been fearing India's bigger size, this strategic asymmetry in terms of size and economy. We have been looking, but I think there are many smaller countries in the world which can compete with the bigger countries. So we have to look inside as well, how we have to move forward. So, so to bridge this perceptual divide, there must be an agreement, and that agreement should be on both sides. So that how to bridge this perceptual divide. And here comes the role of the narratives, which the leadership on both the sides, they need to propagate. And we are living with these web brigades. This is a new kind of a war where we are living. We are living with the web brigades. We are living with the troll armies. And we are living with the troll factories on both sides. So if we have to create prospects, then we have to create a common narrative. And the common narrative can be created if the leadership thinks big, the leadership thinks long. And we need to stop these knee-jerk reactions to the situations. And obviously, when we talk the knee-jerk reactions and we have to avoid all this, then the leadership must not be hostage to the environment. By the way, the environment they created, the environment of hostility in the past. So we have to avoid the knee-jerk reaction. If we will really avoid the knee-jerk reactions, we can think long. We will not be hostage to our own past, and we will be looking forward. And remember that these short-term jolts, they can lead to long-term earthquakes. We are not paying attention that how the societies on both sides have been radicalized. So if we really have to reach a long-term solution, we need to think big. We need to think for a longer period of time. And since I say that there are no prospects of talks, and we can brighten the prospects. And for brightening the prospects, I think we just can't make it bilateral. I think a sincere outside involvement is needed. And that involvement must come from the United States of America. United States, we have been seeing how things happen in turmoil there, but and in United States has been a guarantor of peace in this part of the region. So a sincere involvement is needed. I personally believe that India is getting a more global clout, more global importance, but India is a bigger country, but I think it lacks maturity in creating much of the stable environment. That's not what I'm saying from the Pakistani perspective, but I think it just can't get all that overnight. So proper contacts and communication must be established, and it should be started. It should start from the society, and in particular the social media platforms. And I have found that social media platforms are more secure, more sincere than the other traditional platforms. The mainstream media has not shown maturity, which the social media has shown. The people who are with the big voices, they can make an impact. Forget the troll armies, forget the web armies, those troll factories, what they are doing. But I'm talking about the people, the social media. There are no vulnerabilities. There are no compulsions here. So I think proper contact and communication will be important. We have to create avenues, and we have to unfreeze this showbiz and sports. So the bigger thing for creating a wonderful prospects between India and Pakistan, I think we need to separate this low politics from high politics. Sports, culture, society, people to people contact, educational tours. I think this is what we have to understand. In last 15 years, we have seen a massive mobilization of social media. And in these times, our societies, our people have not met. A youth has not met. The youth is radicalized a lot. I can understand that. I teach myself, and I'm also on social media, and I can see that. But I think there's a lot of hope on both sides. So this low politics must be separated from the high politics. And above all, there's the regional trading arrangements. For this, we need to work. Obviously, on Pakistan's part, we should have given India this MFN status. And Pakistan being a small market, here the businessmen really fear. But I think this is how we can get into a competitive market. And that market can help us to boost our economic capabilities. So forget the traditional security, what we have been doing. I think this is the time to engage in non-traditional security, and coordinated actions are needed here. And for that, for example, we have been facing fog, smog, locust. This is where we need to engage. And non-traditional security can connect us. So if we will keep looking India, Pakistan since last 70 years from the perspective of traditional security, there may not be massive room or much room. But from the non-traditional security perspective, it's a common threat to India and Pakistan, and not just to the India and Pakistan, to the entire region. So then moving forward, that we have to create this SARC visa, we have to operationalize. And obviously for this, trust deficit needs to be reduced. And this is where the role of the leadership, which I speak, comes in. And above all, the most important point, this deficit of media literacy. This is getting lethal with every passing day. The foreign minister of Pakistan and India could not meet at Tajikistan because the warlike environment the media creates. The shaking hands would have been much more dangerous for any side. If they would have shaken hand, the media would have just taken that the other side has just lost. So we have to avoid hawks on both sides. There are hawks in India, there are hawks in Pakistan. So this thing is really serious, that how to get away from the hawks. They will keep dragging, but I find that there is a sincere understanding in India and Pakistan at this moment. And I have seen since this ceasefire agreement that the media has played somehow a positive role. And with this, the leadership, the political leadership, they must not look for the short-term political objectives, and they must not create a hostile environment. When Imran Khan wanted to be elected a prime minister in 2018, he didn't give such good statement, and same did what the Prime Minister Modi did. So at the end, what I would say is that Pakistan needs to get into the Indo-Pacific, and for being part of the new global realignment, for this normalization is required. And I find that there is a massive gap in Pakistan's foreign policy choices, that for us, Indo-Pacific is not an opportunity yet, is not a place which we should explore. And if we do not invest on that diplomatically, politically, economically, I find that this new strategic arrangement, which is just like a transatlantic partnership, we will miss that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. To sum up your presentation, so you pointed out that the bright prospects are still not there between India and Pakistan, and both the sides have influential actors who can work positively in bringing the prospects of bilateral relations on the positive grounds. Alternate to peace is media war, underdevelopment, poverty, etc., which needs more focus to collaborate between both the countries. And sir, you rightly said that 70 years of war like eras are more lethal and have serious consequences to bear, while India and Pakistan are closer to each other. The divide created has become a dominant factor. To bridge the perceptual divide, an agreement needs to be achieved. A common narrative has to be built on both the sides by thinking on broader lines and addressing the radicalism within, especially the hatred conveyed on social media platforms, and connecting via non traditional security platforms are much needed. Thank you so much. I open the session for the question and answer now. I do see Dr. Samina Yasmin, Ambassador Aziz Ahmed Khan, Khalid bin Noori Sahab, General Naeem Lodi Sahab. Anyone can join in, please.
Hello.
Ji,
Hello.
Who's this?
Hello, I'm Akshat from India. I'm from Jalandhar, Punjab. I just want to ask a question about the Pakistani narrative of using self-determination, because I want to just say that it's a contradictory it is a contradiction on the Pakistan part, because the definition of self-determination means that the Kashmiri people can choose between India, Pakistan, or can remain independent. But the Constitution of Pakistan says that it can only become a part of India or Pakistan. No, the option of being independent is not there. So how do you explain this?
And who do you want to address this question?
Mr. CHEEMA.
Well, I'm audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, sir.
I think in the recent statement where the Prime Minister was visiting Kashmir, Prime Minister Imran Khan was visiting Kashmir, he categorically made a point that the Kashmiris have the right to choose whatever they want to choose. So I think for us in Pakistan, maybe the self-determination is very important. We have been talking, but I think one of the problem is that we are not on the table for long, and we need to sit on the table to actually talk that how we have to move from here. And Prime Minister Imran Khan made it very categorically clear that the Kashmiris have the right to choose what they want to choose, and there is no forceful perspective here. On frankly speaking, I have spoken to dozens of Pakistanis who have been Kashmiris who have been my students. And when we talk to them, they want to be independent. So I think Kashmir is really a humanitarian problem, which needs to be looked from the humanitarian lens. And we need to give a choice to the Kashmiris what they want to decide. So it's not Pakistan wants to keep its mandate over Kashmir. It's about the freedom, the fundamental freedom of those people. This is what my understanding says.
If I'm allowed to add something.
Yes, sir, please.
General Naeem Lodi, thank you very much. I think the bottom line is that whatever solution gives relief to Kashmiris, that should be, I think, acceptable to all. And once we say that the option is to join Pakistan and India, that is just because of the UN resolution, and not only because of Pakistani constitution. And Pakistani constitution lays down further that whenever Kashmiris decide to join Pakistan, they will be given another choice, whether they want to remain independent or they want to remain with Pakistan. So this understanding of yours that Pakistani constitution has some problems, I think that is not correct. So anything, even today, which will lessen their pain, which will give them free some sort of free air and free environment, should be acceptable to Pakistanis. That is what I think, and it should be acceptable to Kashmiris.
Thank you, sir. I have a question from Dr. Saidrid. Sir, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. It's really heartening to hear Dr. Salma and Dr. SUBA. Both talked about, Dr. Salma talked more about what ought to be done, and Dr. SUBA talked about the sort of reality check he did for us. And I agree with both of them on this. I have a question for both of them, sort of, which more to SUBA. So I wanted to ask, especially, knowing where we are heading, that can Pakistan India formalize the 2003 ceasefire agreement? Because this is something which we have now, and DGMOs have agreed as well. But this ceasefire agreement is still not formalized. It was just an offer which was accepted and which became sort of a reality. But there's no proper agreement where you have, all the details covered. And so, my question is that is this possible that we can move with this? Because this is also related to what Naeem Lodhi Sahab said, that it will, create an environment which is good for Kashmiris, Pakistanis, and Indians, all of them, as I can understand. So if 2003 ceasefire is formalized with clear rules and regulations, demilitarized zones, neutral observers, and joint commissions, it should reduce the chances of future ceasefire violations, which I feel is in the interest of all the stakeholders. So as I understand, that is in the interest of both countries' security perspective as well, which was mentioned by Dr. Suba. So I want to understand, what are the Indian concerns and Pakistani concerns on formalization of the ceasefire agreement 2003? Thank you.
On the ceasefire agreement, what Salma was telling was news to me. There is nothing called an agreement. If there is no agreement, then what are we talking about? Yeah, there is whether it's an understanding written or unwritten, there is an agreement. But the larger point, the spirit in which you ask, I agree that the need to have formalized agreements in paper with finer aspects. Not only, I would not only stop with what happened in 2003, 2004 in terms of the process towards the ceasefire agreement. I would also extend it to the cross LOC services between the buses and the trucks. I think let us look at all these things, and then let us see how we can formalize them. I agree with the first part of what you asked. But whether this agreement includes, there are 3-4 aspects that you said, whether this agreement or the understanding, I'm not sure about it. But any agreement or understanding, if it is not formal, I'm sure it's going to have multiple interpretations. I think that is something that India and Pakistan should look at and work towards having formal understanding on many issues. We are only looking at ceasefire and the LOCA. I think we should look at the larger border and other areas as well. Let us not look at the peace in terms of ceasefire. Ceasefire in principle has a different meaning. So let us look at the larger peace, and let's not just keep peace only to the line of control. We have to start somewhere. Maybe that should be the starting point, but let us not stop there. Let's look at the larger bilateral engagements as well. I stop
here. Can I just add? I wanted to understand what are the Indian concerns? Why India is not willing to? Because They have been, this was raised by Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in a UN assembly as well. And this has been there. So what I want to understand, why India is reluctant, especially on formalizing the 2003 agreement?
I'm not aware of it. If you ask me, I don't know what the state's position on this is. But as an academic and as a person who has been working across the line of control on this part of our part of Jammu and Kashmir, everyone welcomes the ceasefire. Everyone welcomes what the ceasefire has got to us, and everyone is also uncomfortable with what the violation of ceasefire would lead to. So this is something that we are all looking forward to.
I have two questions, one from Dr. Salma Malik and one from Mr. Arish Khan. Dr. Salma Malik, please.
Thank you, Humaira. I don't have a question, just a comment on the 2003. One could call it understanding. Agreement we usually term as something which is written and then followed through. But of course, following through is something else. But this was an understanding. And the point that I wanted to allude here was that between India and Pakistan, the general trend has been that we remain a lot of times informal, and we tend to honor the informal understandings between the two countries a lot more than we tend to follow the written agreements. And there's a general tendency of being very uncomfortable when it comes to putting things down in concrete, because there's a lot of interpretation, misinterpretation, reinterpretation, and the entire thing is lost in translation. And what I have seen, and many a times in SUBA, is has walked that walk with me, that each time any of us had to travel to the respective countries, from Pakistan to India or India to Pakistan, there is a visa regime, there is a border control regime, but it would get facilitated through personal interventions. And these things, and of course that is not a written agreement, but what I'm trying to say is that when the bureaucracy, or when there are too many firewalls around a certain situation, then what usually works is an understanding, a personal commitment, or a personal say here or there. And this is how it has more or less worked between India and Pakistan. And yes, there is no written agreement between India and Pakistan when it comes to the 2003 ceasefire understanding, but it was an understanding. If it can be formalized into a written text, signed and agreed by both the parties, that would be great. But I really doubt that in the longer run, it would work that way. Not that if we have any agreement signed and vouched and all that, that we tend to, both sides tend to follow it through or stay true to it. But the very fact is that mostly we are better at informal arrangements rather than going for the formal ones. Thank you. Thank you, Humaira.
Thank you. Mr. Arish Khan.
Thank you, Humaira. I have a question for Dr. SUBA Chandran. Pakistanis usually, when we talk about any opening of a dialogue with India, we tend to see it as an opportunity to discuss Kashmir with India. So my question to you, sir, is that would any opening of a dialogue with India lead to any meaningful dialogue on Kashmir or not? If your answer would be yes, then I would also like to know what you think would be the factors that would motivate the Indian government to discuss Kashmir with Pakistan, especially given the context of what happened on August 5, 2019. Thank you.
Thank you. No, let us look at it from 1996. This is a question that we have been. Both countries have not shied away from addressing either terrorism or Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, if you ask me, between 2004 and 2008, we took a long walk together. Did we shy away from looking at? In fact, when the idea of the bus service, cross LOC bus service and cross LOC truck service came to our notice, or when we came to know about it, the state was much ahead of us, much ahead of the academic community, think tank community, and the civil society in terms of bringing it. Yeah. Do we think that this would have happened without both countries talking about Jammu and Kashmir? So it is historically incorrect that we did not talk about Jammu and Kashmir, in the last, that you just look at the discussion. It's a different question whether we agreed to each other or not. But then what we did between 2004 and 2008 is something remarkable. If you ask me where do we start, I think we should go back to the bus service and the truck service, and we were supposed to have cross LOC tourism. Myself and a scholar from your part of the world, we worked on cross LOC tourism and then how to take the process forward. So there was, and all these things were happening with some kind of an understanding, with the support that we should move forward on Jammu and Kashmir across the line of control. This is the one side. The second one, this letter and the spirit, having an understanding in print and fine print, it tends to make one believe that both countries are great adherent to the letter. We have signed so many agreements, documents since 1947. If only someone looks into and then look at. So whether you have it in letter or not, what is the largest spirit behind it? I think that's what we may want to look at as well when we talk in terms of the letter. I would rather go. I think we should look at that larger spirit, which is lacking. I'm not worried about the letter. If we have to, both the societies, great Jugaad societies, can bend and do whatever it want if they want to. There were times I have got visa in a matter of 2 hours to come to Pakistan. There were times in which for 2 months I have been running between and I have not got a. So it's not about the letter, it's about the larger spirit. We are great Jugaad countries. We will do anything with the letter, or if we don't want to do, we will use the same letters not to do. So let us not look into the letter too much. Let us look at the larger spirit and then try to build the spirit. I'll stop here. I'm sure you understand what I am trying to get at. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Samina Yasmeen.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone. Really loved listening to all three of you. I just had a couple of questions, but they really build on what Dr. SUBA Chandran, you were talking about, the three sort of dimensions that we need to look at. I'd agree with you in terms of India looking differently, Pakistan looking at another side, and the new narratives that are being built. But I think we can't separate them from what's happening within the societies. So those narratives aren't really being created because somehow the Indian government decides that it's going to present this particular narrative, or the Pakistani government decides that that's what they are going to talk about. They reflect the social dynamics that emerge over a period of time. So I think the dynamics or the narratives that are emerging in India at the moment really are ones where you see, at least from my point of view, there's a contradiction. You see India really becoming a global power, being recognized in that capacity, but at the same time, really putting away what Dr. Salma Malik was talking about, the secular ideals, which I think a lot of Pakistanis were very fond of when we went there. So my question really is that, can we separate this narratology from the social, economic, local dynamics that are taking place in India? I can talk about Pakistan later, but I'm more interested in what you say. And secondly, given the fact that Indian approach to regional relations is one where it counters constantly Pakistan's need for equality, which admittedly, as QAMAR said, is not necessarily based on reality. It is a smaller state compared to India. But if you're constantly pushing it down, so to speak, Pakistan's throat to say you're not unequal, you're an unequal, then the possibility, even if it is there, of improving relations may not really come about. So can we expect a change in the way Indian diplomacy vis-a-vis Pakistan works? And second question is, you talked about the regional dynamic, and Kamar, you talked about we need America. Why do Indians and Pakistanis always need someone else to help them negotiate? If there's so much thinking going on, 70 plus years of thinking experiences, what is it that actually prevents these two countries from sitting down and talking among themselves? They're really questions, and I'd love any answers that you can give. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yasmin. You know, I'm glad that you're there on the other side. We have been reading you. You know, it's a great honor to respond to you on this, Professor Yasmin. You know, I'm sure many of you would have heard about Professor Ashish Nandi. You know, a great doyen and anthropologist, sociologist. He would tell us that in the South Asian continent and in the South Asian context, whatever you think is true and a fact, the opposite is also equally true and a fact. This is the great South Asian trait. So when we are talking about narrative India-Pakistan relations, let us not look at only from one prism. Let us also look at from, you know, whether the opposite is also true, and there is a, you know, in terms of secularism and the secular credentials of India, I understand there is a larger worry at the global level. There are reasons for why there is an apprehension in rest of the world, but I'll go back to what Ashish Nandi said. You know, that I sit in Bangalore, I teach in Bangalore, and I also interact with folks here. There are certain reservations. At the same time, there is also enough confidence that this is a phase that we will go through. You know, I was talking about India-Pakistan muddling through. I'm sure in each individual country in the region is also muddling through in terms of what it wants. You look at from 1947 to today. I very well remember. I'm quite fond of. I'll take a minute to talk about this. The Mainstream, one of the left-leaning magazine, published in 1997 in the front page on how India should move forward in terms of inter-ethnic, inter-secular relations. It's the 50 years of India's independence, so it looked at it, and that was what Jawaharlal Nehru said in 1947. So we have been going through this curve. The country is as I said, smuggling through on many issues, but I think there is still a larger belief and faith in the constitutional process, and whatever our constitution say, and we still have a lot of hope. And despite whatever rest of the world how they look at, my fear and suspicion is that the rest of the world, especially in Pakistan, I see the Pakistan narrative on India. I think there is a sense that what India ought to be, and you want to see that what India ought to be as what India is. Maybe what India is, what you think is what India ought to be. For this, I think you may, the same would go with many Pakistani writings about Pakistan. In India, I would say the same thing, what Salma said earlier in another context today. What you want to pick and what you want to believe and how you want to construct that narrative. I think there is still a lot of faith in this part of the world on constitution and whatever it says. Let me stop here.
Mr. Kamar CHEEMA.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Samina Yasmin. I think there's a question of maturity, why we need America. I think I personally find that India is an important player. It's very important, but India is not that mature yet that we can talk. And for this, we need to understand there is a huge backlog of history. Our past has not been very good, and we have a problem with that. And then above all, we need to understand that the stakeholders in both the countries are different. So, for example, in India, we have the political leadership, which controls this the entire issue of talks. But here in Pakistan, the elected and unelected offices both control this. So the unelected offices in Pakistan, they have that institutional memory, and they believe that only they can talk with India in a right way. So in such kind of an environment, I personally find that we need a guarantor because things are not established on both sides. There is a challenge of maturity, and India is enjoying too much power, too much global spotlight on India because of particularly this changing regional realignment. And with this, and the Prime Minister Modi has come up with this narrative of giving too much confidence to the Indians. And the institutionalization of Indian values globally is something which is giving India much more importance. But at the same time, this confidence is too much. Confidence is not good at time for a traditional rival like Pakistan to talk. And one more thing is that I think for a longer period of time, United States has established this global order, and they have been doing this, and they're crafting new global order, even in Indo-Pacific, where India is still a more important player. But yes, there are limitations of the United States. For example, I was just listening to President Biden, and he was saying that despite the limitations of this human rights debate, we need to pursue this with diplomacy on human rights. So I think that is very interesting, that how China and India calling their internal human rights issues as internal problems, and great powers like United States have been facing challenges even to how to talk to them on this. So I think in this kind of an environment and challenges, the bilateral talks and in the immaturity I find on both sides of leadership is there. So we need someone, and the history has shown that we needed someone in the past as well.
If I'm allowed to say two words.
May I respond to CHEEMA's?
Yes,
just
first,
half a minute.
go ahead.
On a lighter note, CHEEMA sir, more than US want what India and Pakistan need. I think US wants India and Pakistan in terms of how they could address their minority issues. The Black Lives Matter, the Brown Lives Matters, the Asian Lives Matter. What we see, we should look at the demands that the Black Lives Matter is pushing forward, or the trial that's going in the George Floyd murder trial. I think we have handled our minorities much better than what the Americans have been handling. So let us not give that exalted position to the US. And then, that we haven't, I think we have our own strengths. I think with all our issues and economic hurdles, I think we have handled things much relatively better than what they, based on what. So it is on the lighter note, just as a stop. Sorry, Ambassador.
General Lodi sir, please.
I just wanted to say that as per the requirement of somebody to assist us, that is probably based on history, as Dr. CHEEMA said. So I'll not go into the detail that we could not resolve our problems in 48 and then Indus Water Treaty and 65, and later on every time somebody, even the latest standoff, somebody else had to ask us to do to settle down. But one thing which I do not agree with Dr. CHEEMA is that we should have United States as the interlocutor. No, sir, not at all. They are strategic partners of India, and we need to have a consortium of countries, including China, Russia, and America, and maybe one odd country from both sides. Then it will be a more neutral forum, probably. But I agree with SUBA sir that the best would be that if the governments can do it themselves. But that is an idealistic situation which may not happen. But then the second best is to have somebody from outside to help us. It happens all over the world, so there's no problem. We should not shy from that. But yes, definitely not America. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There's a question from Ms. Nabila Jafar. She's saying that why the traditional security matters take precedence over the non-traditional security threats in our national narratives. What is the reason for this? The domestic political interest, the lack of will or ill-informed policies. Any of the speaker can answer this. Who would like to answer? Dr. Salma Malik?
Humaira, thank you. I'm sure everyone would have a different take on this, but I would look at it from this particular angle when Barry Buzan and Beaver and others, they were looking at the regional security complex theory. One aspect that they would always say that the patterns of conflict bring South Asia as a region together rather than the patterns of cooperation. And I think the NTS require a pattern of coordination as well as cooperation. And this was much on what SARC was all formed on and about. And unfortunately, I would actually say that despite the fact that SARC's performance has been modest, and some of the people who are very critical of SARC would actually say that it has been less than modest, but there have been things that have taken place from the SARC forum, which means from the regional outlook. But when it comes to the national narratives, then every country has its own story to tell. Number one. Number two, the factor is that it takes a lot of confidence building and a lot of trust building to work together, and a lot of prudence and maturity in leadership to understand that the common good of the region requires us to put our hands together and look at issues in the non-traditional realm which have a very strong tendency to cross over that gray zone that we have in our mind and move to the traditional aspect. Many of the things that are happening, I mean, it's actually funny to see that some leaders are saying that, country A sent COVID to country B, and country B sent locusts to country A, and this has happened and that has happened. So, I mean, this is all for public consumption. But if we are really mature enough, then we really have to put our hands together and look at aspects. Just look at the particular phenomenon of having the Rohingya refugees coming to India and to Bangladesh, two countries or areas in these countries which are already population stressed and resource stressed as well. So it can very well give rise to different type of conflicts that one can talk about, and there is a tendency where non-traditional conflicts can convert very well into traditional conflicts. So I think unless and until, I totally agree with Nabila that there's been a less tendency when it comes to this, and I would rather blame it on a bit of all three aspects. There is the domestic political clout as well as interest. The lack of will, 100%. I think this takes the priority, and not so much as ill-informed policies. Making a policy which is compliant to a disaster that comes up it's not very difficult. I remember the 2005 earthquake, where all the countries which were shaken by the gods' wrath, they all came together and they were helping each other, and many things stopped to matter for the few days that the crisis was really high. So there can be a commonality of interest. They can be coming together, holding hands, and working on things together. But I think the biggest impediment here is the political interest and lack of will, but leadership maturity, and also the understanding and comprehension that one cannot relegate NTS anymore as irrelevant issues confined to national or state boundaries alone. These are issues that affect everyone, regardless of the color, ethnic origin, religion, etc., etc. So one has to, especially COVID in point, so one has to put your hands together in this attempt. Thank you.
Two quick points, Gomera, on this non-traditional security issues. Let me take the example of locust, what CHEEMA Sab and Salma was also talking about. You'd be amazed to know, despite the problem that we had, how much of cooperation, contacts that we had on locust for the last few years between India and Pakistan. Just ask people who have been handling it. Yeah, there have been so much of a to and fro on handling the locusts. Yeah. My fear is the moment this happened with we the academics, when we started this idea of this non-traditional security threats and then put many things into the security basket. The moment you add up many things into the security basket, obviously the state agencies, the security agencies are going to deal with it because it's a security issue that you are talking about. What would have been an easy disaster management issue, the moment you talk in terms of disaster management as a security threat, whether traditional or non-traditional, the security agencies, security institutions enter into. And all security institutions tend to be very defensive and extra careful in looking at it. So one of the point that I would argue is in the 1980s, the number of items in the security and the non-traditional security basket, and you look at what we have today, we have been adding everything. I'm sure one day we will add even a cell phone into the security, or maybe it's already there in the security, non-traditional security issue. The more we add, the more we invite security institutions to decide what needs to be. And all security agencies across the world, from US to Japan, are defensive and they take their own time. That's the ideal way to unresolve or not address. So, I would say the non-traditional security issues or the many issues have been the low-hanging fruits. Unfortunately, we are securitizing it. When I say we, it's not only India and Pakistan, it's across the world. Refugees has become a security issue. Now it was non-traditional, now it's become a security issue. I'm sure that we are going to bring many things into the security basket. And in the process, what could have been a low-hanging fruit, we are going to make it as a high-hanging.
Thank you so much. I see there is a comment from Mr. Imran Sardar. Imran Sardar.
Thank you, Humera. I do not have a particular question. I just wanted to just clarify that Pakistan has just stated that normalcy in Jammu and Kashmir is a prerequisite to talk with India. And the people, I think, around have just taken it as a granted that Pakistan has admitted the 370 article that India has just revoked. I just want to just clarify that Pakistan has never in the past recognized the Article 370. It is irrelevant in this sense that Pakistan has just taken a backseat and has just accepted what India has done. Our position has been very clear, and that position is the right of the people, the human rights, that also include the right of self-determination. So the Article 370 does not figure and has not figured previously. What has upset, of course, is the sort of steps that accommodate the revocation of Article 370. That steps need to be reversed. So normalcy does not mean that we have just accepted what India has done. So the question that I want to ask, that recently I was just reading a report, a United States intelligence report, that just forecast a large-scale war between India and Pakistan in the next 5 years. So I think I do not say that we must cooperate with each other, and I do not say that India is investing in the East, as Dr. SUBA has said, and Pakistan is looking toward the West. Okay, both are doing their jobs, but the war is not beneficial, as they do not cooperate, but they must not intervene into that kind of hostility that lead to the disrupt both countries' objectives. So I just want to ask from SUBA that how do you see that report? Is there any possibility of a large-scale war between India and Pakistan in the next 5 years? What do you say?
Thank you.
That's quite an interesting question, isn't it? Let's go back into history. Let's look at how the great French and the Germans fought. Let's look into some of the many European wars, and let's look into how the poor brown Indians and Pakistanis have fought with each other in the last 40, 50 years. I think we don't give credit to many things that we have done or we have not done. None of our wars were all-out wars. No, I'm not trying to make a case that we will fight with each other again. There seems to be an tendency in the West that nuclear weapons in the hands of two immature countries would lead to a nuclear war. And many in India and Pakistan are falling for it. How is that a nuclear weapon is much more stable in the hands of US or in UK or in France? It's not stable in the hands of India and Pakistan. I don't buy this argument at all that the presence of nuclear weapons would lead to nuclear war. I sincerely wish facts would support this case. The number of weapons that you have and the number of weapons you have used in the last two, three wars that we fought. So there is an element of exaggeration or even I would say an element of condescending approach towards India, Pakistan, as we are waiting to fight with each other. I think it also does not give a good impression. It also does not give credit to the way that our institutions have looked at war, fought, brought a ceasefire to an end. So I don't see that. I don't see a major war between the two countries. However, there were doctrines, there were strategies that we have been talking, whether it was limited war or a cold start or whatever that we have been discussing. And this is what all militaries do. Just because there were multiple doctrines, does that mean that we are going to fight? So I don't agree with that statement, especially from rest of the world. Even some of us believe that this is a nuclear flashpoint. The subcontinent is a nuclear flashpoint, or the facts do not support it. Yeah, if we want to believe, then I think we should. I don't have a case against those who want to believe that we will fight, but I don't. On that's the point. On JNK, the point that you raised about Article 370 and other issues, I think India would see if Pakistan wants to keep that as a prerequisite, pre-condition for a India-Pakistan dialogue. That is Pakistan's position. What can India do about it? There is nothing much India can do about it. We talk about unconditional dialogue, but we put a condition to it. I'm sure, when things are ripe, when situation is ripe, that when you want to talk, you will still want to talk about that. That's the point that I was trying to make, the spirit. Maybe that's why my presentation, the earlier presentation, was a bit pessimistic. It was not, the situation doesn't look ripe enough for a larger approach. I stop here on that.
I'm allowed to say a thing.
I'm sorry? Sir, please. Yes, sir.
Please. I think I fully agree with SUBA Saab that being a military strategist, that there is hardly any room for an all-out war or a big war between India and Pakistan. I fully endorse that. And all other strategies, the doctrines, those are actually meant to avoid such a big war. They only talk of things so that we remain below the threshold of a big war. And let me also say that whenever some intelligence assessments are made public, intelligence assessments being made public. So what does it mean? I think they want to scare us and they want to keep us reliant on them, India and Pakistan. I feel very happy that SUBA is understanding it and we can also understand it. Either they want a war between us or they want, we being always looking up to them. That would be the purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Salma Malik, you have raised hand.
Humaira, one thing I would like to say, I agree both with SUBA and General Lodhi sir, that the possibility of all-out war as put by the US government report doesn't seem to be true. But I think we hold too much faith and we become too much hostage to anything that is coming from the Gora land. If they say that there's going to be a war, then should we really prepare for war in 5 years? I mean, we are living in this region, we own this region, we know what is happening. We are pretty crazy, both sides of the border. We are crazy and we compete with each other when it comes to craziness. So there's no dirt to that. And we have handled ourselves pretty okay with a lot of issues with one another. And this madness will continue. Perhaps for the Western world, they may not understand that highly volatile, emotive, rhetorical people who actually are 1/4 of the global population, how are they coexisting without using the nuclear bomb for the longest? But we have done that, and I mentioned in my presentation that one aspect which was followed very religiously by both sides after 1998, till such time the dialogue process was vibrant and was working, was the strategic aspect of the composite dialogue process. And many a times the stakeholders who themselves are involved in conflict making, and here I would say the hakis on both sides, they know what the calculations about going for just a war or a battle is. So you just don't go to war because someone has said that you have to go to war. Let them say whatever they have to say. Does that really mean that we have to take a report written by an intelligence unit seriously and start working towards that end? That's a bit nonsensical. As for Article 370 and all, yes, Pakistan's position is very much clear, and no one in Pakistan is negotiating when it comes to Kashmir or when it comes to anything. There have been conditionalities in India Pakistan talks in the past, whether it was terrorism, cross border terrorism, however you would like to interpret it. There are conditionalities now as well. Dialogues did happen, back channel diplomacy happened, secret talks happen, and there is a possibility that more such things can happen in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Last two questions. One from Miss Maria Mastoor. She wanted to know the how the from Dr. Subha Chandran, that how the hardliners in India are perceiving India's recent rapprochement with Pakistan. Thank you.
Now, what is the approach we are talking about?
India's recent rapprochement with Pakistan.
And that's my question. What is the approach that we are
sent
talking
you the
about?
olive
See that
leaf.
what happened. No, I what. Let me on a serious note. When there was this ceasefire announcement, that announcement relating to ceasefire a month back between the two militaries, there was a tendency in the media that this is a start of a new peace process. I think peace process we use very casually between India and Pakistan. It was a decision between the two militaries for two purely military reasons. If you ask me, it was limited to the LOC. It's a different story. You may ask, we should have followed it up, and then we should have got many things. That was an expectation. So what happened in last month in terms of the ceasefire? If you ask me, I see it as an understanding at the cross LOC level between the two militaries. Full stop. It did not have a larger peace process. So I don't see that whether there were any objections to what we agreed. There was a lot of expectations along the line of control, especially because of human lives, livelihood depend on peace in that region. So there was a lot of welcoming note. If you look at the statements from the media, all of them across, the mainstream media, social media, print media, electronic media, all of them welcomed the understanding. Was there any specific note from the Hawks or the right? I haven't come across that this should not be the case. I don't know. Maybe you may be following the right more closely in Pakistan than we are. The same way we are following your right more closely than you are.
Thank you so much. The last question from Khalid Banuri Saab.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for a very, very interesting discussion. Obviously, the issues are complicated. I have one very quick comment, two observations, and a short question to each of the panelists. My comment is something that has been talked about on this issue of the third party. And I completely agree that despite the fact that Trump administration and Biden administration are different, United States is not likely to be an objective interlocutor, and hence it would not make sense, even in an academic theoretical way, to expect that United States would be neutral because of its strategic interests, because of it expecting India as a conduit for containment to China and so forth. Two quick related observations are that if we look at the history of negotiations, talks, issues about confidence building, India tends to always take a position of bilateral handling of matters. If you look at the objectivity of it, let's also recall that the one principle is that if you want to achieve something, then get to the table. Don't talk for the sake of talks. Regretfully, some experience has been in which this talk for the talk was an Indian approach. So that's the kind of broad observation that one has to work with, whether there will be an intent to achieve something. If there is this kind of sheer arrogance and a hostile media and not much of the official responses to the possibilities of peace. So, it becomes a bit iffy. So my question to the panel is, what timelines do each of them think would be actually realistic to negotiate something meaningfully? Months, years, decades? What's your view? Thank you very much.
I can stick my. If I'm allowed, of course, he has asked from the panelists, they can respond later on. I don't think the timelines are relevant. The events would be relevant. In my opinion, until and unless the deep-rooted animosity which we have based on history, instead of learning from history, we are stuck in the groove of history that we were enemies and we have stayed so many years and this and that, and Mahabharat and smaller Pakistan, this and that. Unless we get out of this groove of history, I'm not saying that negate the history, I'm saying learn from history and move ahead. So unless we see any indicators from the two governments or from the two peoples to change their attitude, probably timelines are irrelevant. Thank you.
Dr.
No, let me start on the US point on whether US would be a impartial mediator or whether you want to be mediator. This is precisely what I was telling, the changing orbit and the changing paradigm that we are looking at. There was a time, every second scholar from Pakistan would talk about US. Now in this room, that repeatedly we are talking about US is not a US is not a dependable or whatever that we want. So this is the changing paradigm that we are talking about. We are getting pulled into different orbits, and then as a result, whatever happens between US and China will also impact on India-Pakistan relations. I'm sure this is going to be a big question in terms of whether India and Pakistan would ever agree with a third party mediation together, and then who would be that party, whether it's a single person or a group of person, as somebody else commented. The second point in terms of if war is strategy of politics by other means, I'm sure peace is also. If I have to use that extension, unless we see peace as a strategic option, peace is not going to come just because people want peace. I don't want to sound harsh or rude to the intellect and the academic that we have in this room, but if peace is strategic, I sincerely believe it would come only after a well thought, well drafted discussion. So it would not, if you ask me, I can say if tomorrow if there is a summit and if the two prime ministers meet and have a handshake, and then we are going to see a totally different discussion in the next 3 months. Meaning that despite whatever I said, peace is strategic, and institutions have to come back, institutions have to work together. There are cases in India-Pakistan relationship, just two individuals and in a single visit have changed the history, have changed the course, but they have not lasted for a long time. I'm sure you would agree. So that's where the institutions do matter. So unless peace is strategic for the institutions that we are talking about, concerned, I am sorry to be pessimistic on this. I don't see peace on the horizon unless we see a handshake tomorrow between the two prime ministers, and then a major statement, and there is a Imran Khan comes to New Delhi in a bus, or our prime minister comes to Islamabad or Lahore in a train. Then it changes. By the way, we have been doing it. We have been doing it with a lot of drama and fanfare in the past.
If I jump the queue and I take the mic from QAMAR, I would say one thing. I agree with SUBA that there has to be some clout to the peace virtues that we have. But the fact is, the various aspects that SUBA is mentioning here, they have been very limited episodic aspects. And unfortunately, if they didn't reverse the course, the course or the direction of peace didn't really go too far. But we are where we are today. Would an external actor such as the US, China, Russia, three major actors, be the peace maker in this area? Borrowing from Muid's words, that the US still is extremely important when it comes to South Asia. And it's agreed that today US does not stand favorable for Pakistan because we look at US from a different angle. And yesterday, India was doing the same. But when you go through the history of South Asia relations or India-Pakistan relations, despite all the noises India was making then and Pakistan is making now, in the hearts of hearts and behind the curtains, it was the US who would push both the actors and encourage them to come to the peace table or to the negotiating table. And that was also during the 1960s, Bhutto Swaran Singh talks, other talks as well. Why was US involved in Kargil? So it's wrong to say that if US today, and God forbid if there is something that goes drastically wrong between both the countries, such as the surgical strike, the February episode. Again, it was what US administration had said that was making headlines across the border. So one cannot say that US has stopped to be important enough. For Pakistan, US importance is not going anywhere. China is still coming up. China is still a very cautious actor and it's a very cautious player, but we are not talking about China here, but only in the context of the US. But saying that US is the answer to all our problems, that is something that takes the discussion in a different direction, because US has a lot of its own problems, and thanks to Trump, many of those problems have snowballed now. As for the time for peace, few things that I would say. The time for peace can be expedited if there is not too much of investment on building the hate constituencies across the divide. If we keep on working on these hate constituencies, the perceptions, the images, what we are thinking, what we think about the other, that is going to become extremely restrictive. And that is going to push peace way behind a scheduled timeline, even if we have in our mind. So one cannot say a decade from now peace would happen. A decade from now, perhaps, unfortunately, we might be at war. And that would be an extremely difficult situation. Tomorrow there can be something and we go to war. The last 2 years have been a very uneasy 2 years for both the countries, where Pakistan's airspace was being violated time and again. So many things are happening. The region is a very happening place. But I think it's the need to change how we are looking at the region and how we are looking at each other that is going to expedite and build the constituencies of peace and make the cost of conflict extremely expensive. Thank you.
Well, I'll just give a quick comment. I think I will agree with what General Lodi said, that maybe we need a consortium of powers and we need a consortium of countries. Yes, that's a good point. We can go for a concert of powers even for that. But in my understanding, which country has the most powerful diplomatic toolbox to bring any country on the table? In my understanding, it's still the United States. But the question is, are the Americans willing for that? The most important time we lost was somewhere around 2004 to 2014-15, before the Americans left Afghanistan. The Americans have gone long ago from the Afghanistan. Now, and we have been we have been their ally. We were never their friend. India is a friend of the United States. So, but we have been cooperating even as an ally of the United States. So I think we lost the best time. And now what we are doing, we are asking for a concession for a talk. India is ready to talk, but India is not ready to negotiate. How to negotiate? Who can help us to negotiate? That is an important point. And I think what Mr. Khalid Binouri was mentioning as far as this timeline, I think Imran Khan is left with 2.52 and about 2 years. Mr. Prime Minister Modi has somewhere around 3.5 years. So we have to find out that the political mandate is very much necessary. And we have to look at that, how we can reach a conclusion. And the recent decision by the Economic Advisory Council and then the cabinet reversed this was not something in the right direction. And all what matters is that on both sides, the political empowerment is very much needed for talks. And looking at the situation of the time of both the prime ministers is left, I find that one more year is one next year is very much important for starting talks. If we do not start talk in 1 year, in one coming year, it will be much late, I think.
Thank you so much for the valuable input and discussion. I hand over the floor to President IRS, Ambassador Nadeem Riaz now.
Thank you very much, Humera. I have listened very intently to the panelists and to the views of others on the subject. But, I personally feel that no country can bring another country to the negotiating table unless and until there is a will. And that will has to come from within that country or from within the two countries which are to be brought on the negotiating table. You may give examples from history in the past, but you also have to look at the circumstances. You are talking about two nuclear powers. You are talking about two countries which have a relationship which is a difficult relationship. It has a relationship in which there are umpteen issues which need to be talked and discussed. Firstly, I feel that they will only come on the negotiating table when there is a will, and will from both sides. The opinion and the ideas of one side does not matter. The second thing which one has to keep in mind is that what will they achieve once they come on the negotiating table? If there are certain preconditions which are put, whether it is terrorism, whether it is Kashmir, would the two sides be willing? And without discussing, in my opinion, the issue of Kashmir, any future negotiations between the two countries will go nowhere. Because There are many parties to the conflict. There is the international side, there are the Kashmiris, there are the Pakistanis, there are the Indians. Commenting on whether they will peace, I hope that there will be peace. I hope sanity will prevail on both sides so that there is a semblance of peace. There are no surgical strikes, and there are no situations which bring the two countries to a point where they throw caution away to the wind. So I think one has to wait and see. One should only come to the negotiating table when there is the right time for it, because talking for the sake of talking will lead us nowhere. I think we should all hope that the intelligentsia, the academics, the various top minds in both countries will preach peace, because I think that is very important. Because along with geostrategy, there is geoeconomics, there is poverty, there is the pandemic. Economic development has to take place. The region has to progress. SAARC has to move forward, and they can only move forward with rationality and a desire of peace. These were my comments. I'm sure that a lot of you will not agree with them, but this is what I felt, and I thought that I should share this with you. Thank you, Humera.
Thank you so much. To conclude this today's session, I would just like to say that, as Dr. Salma Malik pointed out, that too much firewalls around would seriously impact the peace efforts. And unfortunately, the patterns of conflict in South Asia had brought the region closer than the cooperation. But there had been times when the cultural cooperation and people to people interaction had brought the region and both the countries together. So we can hope for the best, to wait and see that whether the mutual willingness and the leadership maturity would be there to find a best solution to lead towards the peaceful road map. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, the respectful speakers and the participants, for the valuable input and informed discussions.